Welcome to Stories of Our Childhood Forgotten Gifts. My guest today is a very special lady, Teresa Brown, who lives in the beautiful Glasshouse Mountains in Queensland, Australia, but is originally from the USA. Teresa had a fascinating childhood with so many incredible gifts, including telepathy, intuition, precognition, visions, and vivid dreams. And Teresa's here to explain all that to you today. Welcome, Teresa, and thank you for joining us. Could you tell us a little about yourself and what led you to share your story?
I was always considered a rather quiet, shy, reserved child. I think I kind of lived in a world of my own. I didn't need to use language when I could have. I chose to communicate with my mother in particular through telepathy. When I went to school, my father insisted that they do testing on me. They thought I might have even been autistic. And perhaps I was. But back in those days, they didn't really have a measure for testing the girl. But they sent me off to the University of Washington and ran all these battery of tests on me. Like everything came back normal. But clearly, I was a different little girl. My mother would have described me as deeply sensitive, intuitive, telepathic. I had a very rich inner world, we'll say. I feel sometimes like I come from a very, very different place. And this place has been such an adventure getting to know. Sometimes I felt like I don't really belong here, but I'm finding as I get older and the times change, I do think I do have a place here. I do think I have a purpose here, and hence this conversation today. I guess the reason why I thought it would be useful, helpful to me, and perhaps to other people to share my story is because I suspect what I have to share is not dissimilar to what many other people have experienced in their own lives. And I think it's over time that we normalize being deeply sensitive, being empathic, having vivid dreams, gaining learning, and even companionship from hidden realms. That it's not all just fanciful childhood stuff that we can or should ignore. It's often important that we develop these relationships to nature, to perhaps spirit guides or friends on the other side of the veil. I guess for me, I've come to realize in my own life, the unseen world is far more significant in my day-to-day life than the seen world. I'm learning to blend those two together in a way that is meaningful to me has become, it's part of my life purpose at this stage.
I totally understand, having been very similar as a child. I do feel there's so many people, Teresa, out there, as you say, who have these abilities, and we have shut them down.
I can remember I felt shut down from the outer world. Influence of saying that's too fanciful, that's too magical, that's, that's not real. And getting that reflection from such a young age, that's not real. That really is it's quite a shocking thing. And perhaps that's what made me so introverted was, gosh, if that's not real to them, I won't share it with them. But gee, it's real for me. But my sense of it was it wasn't welcome in the outer world. It wasn't welcome in the classroom. It wasn't welcome at the dinner table. It wasn't welcome at my friend's dinner table either. It just wasn't welcome. What I had to bring, the richness of my inner life, was not yet welcome in this world. And that, I believe, is changing. And not just, is it welcome now? I think it's desperately needed now. So this conversation, I feel, is really, really important. I'm excited for it.
Teresa, do you want to share some of your stories? Some people might not understand what telepathy is or what vivid dreams are, visions are. And you've got so many amazing gifts. So if you could just cover over some of the stories that you've shared with me, which are just amazing stories. And I understand them, and I'm sure so many others will understand it. It just might awaken that in them as well.
Yeah. Well, I've had quite incredible experiences all throughout my life. I maybe had a period throughout my 20s where I was so involved with outer world and getting my bearings in the world that it got all pushed aside. But for the rest of my life, what I'm about to describe is very much a part of my experience. But starting with my earliest experiences, as I mentioned previously, my mother made a point of mentioning to me as a young adult that when you were a little girl, 3, 4, 5, you didn't speak. You just didn't need language. And I said, well, how did I remember having friends. I said, how did I get on in the world? And she said, you were very good at telepathy. You were very, very good at transmitting to me and others what it is. She said, your face was so full of expression as well. You could transmit and communicate when it was you needed to communicate and get information from other people as well. I think it was my 4th birthday, I finally started speaking. And she said, when you did, it wasn't like you were just beginning to experiment with language. She said, you began speaking complete, full, grammatically correct sentences. And I thought, wow, I had no awareness about that, me being different as a child until she reflected that back to me. So I think that's worth mentioning. That could be very, very common experience for children. One of the things I shared with you was an experience I had where it was the wee hours of the morning. I had been deeply asleep, and suddenly I opened my eyes. I just woke up very quickly. I didn't know why. I don't have any recall about that. I just remember opening my eyes, and I'm lying in bed, and I'm looking up, and I'm seeing something that I don't know what to make of it. I don't know what I'm seeing, but I sense something is very, very wrong. And I jumped out of my bed, and I ran to my parents' bedroom, and I woke them up. And then all panic and pandemonium broke out. I still didn't understand what was wrong. I didn't understand fully until later. But what happened is that our sleeping bedrooms were up on the 3rd floor, and the furnace was down in the basement, which was 2 floors beneath us. But it had been filling the house with black smoke. And something, we'll call it divine intervention, woke me up just before it descended down onto me, where I would have lost consciousness and the whole family would have died. So that to me is a miracle, incredible gift. And it saved 7 lives that night. Another one that comes to mind was when I had a great aunt who, I wouldn't say I was close to her, but she was interested in me. And I used to go with my grandmother to visit her. So we had a rapport. And I can remember she gave me Tasha Tudor book of fairy tales from her life and her childhood back in the, oh my gosh, 1875, I think was the year she had in the front of it. Anyway, one night I was dead asleep, and all of a sudden I was aware in my dreams that Aunt Jeanette was there with me. And she was saying, bye, bye, not hi or hello, but bye. And it was quite solemn, actually. And that was just it. There was no other exchange. There was no anything. And I almost completely forgot about it until the next morning. And my mother got a phone call. And when she came out, she said, Aunt Jeanette passed away last night. And in that moment, it just hit me. I realized what she was doing in that dream wasn't just saying bye. She was telling me she was leaving in the earth plane. So that was pretty memorable. Another one that was more distressing with a girlfriend of mine that I was very close to in maybe ages 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. We were in many classes together at school, and we played together all the time. And we had a very close connection and relationship. And I'd come home from school one afternoon, and it was cold, and I decided to have a bath. And I'm just luxuriating a bath, daydreaming, as was my like. And all of a sudden, my normal vision disappeared, and I just had a vision of Peggy in this car accident. It was like I was outside. She was in a car, and I was outside. and the windscreen, and I could see her coming forward towards the dash of the windscreen. And it just frightened the bejeebies out of me. And I just started screaming. And my mom came to investigate to see what was wrong with me. And I told her, and she's like, oh my gosh. She said, I just got a phone call from Peggy's mom telling me that she had been in a car accident earlier that day. And we were both just shocked. I had no idea where that came from. I've since had many other incredible visions, wide awake, but just often it happens when I'm in a relaxed state and just available to whatever comes. She was okay, fortunately. But the brain tries to figure out, how did that happen? How could I have been in that place? I've had many other dreams. Like I mentioned, I grew up in Seattle. And one of the really wonderful features of Seattle was that when I was a small child, they had the World's Fair. We can now call it Expo, but in 1962, they had the World's Fair in Seattle. They built something called the Space Needle. It's a really tall tower. And at the very top, they've got this rotating platform in a restaurant. And people love to go up to the top, and you can just see everywhere for miles and miles. And having grown up in Seattle, I knew the Space Needle from every direction imaginable. Yeah, I knew what it looked like from all the different vantage points. And I had a dream one night as a kid. And all of a sudden, I was seeing the Space Needle from a building, or from a perspective. My mind is thinking a building, but from a perspective that didn't even exist. My mind would go, how am I doing this? So I have dreams. I've always had dreams where I'll wake up within the dream and start navigating it with my conscious mind going on. What?
You told me that when you turned 14, you experienced what you came to think of as the first dark night of the soul for you. That.
Yeah, I still to this day couldn't tell you what brought that on. I had been through a dissolution of my parents' marriage, which was really, really devastating. But I was actually at a happy place in my life. My parents had, it was a relief to have that marriage out of the way and completed, finalized, because they weren't happy. So it was hard to make sense out of this dark night of the soul. But all of a sudden, when most young teens want to get out there and go to dances and socialize, there was something happening to me. I felt like I was imploding. Just everything was going deep, 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 and dark. And it's like the light of my world was just dimming. And I had no idea why. And my mom knew I was in trouble. And she said, honey, do you feel like you can talk this to me about this stuff? And I said, I don't know what I'd say. I honestly don't know what I'd say. And she said, well, when my parents split up, they got a highly qualified family psychologist to help walk us through what we might expect, and to share feelings and talk and whatnot. And she said, do you want to go back and see Dr. Goodrich? And I thought, you know what? That sounds like a really good idea. I think I'd like that. And so I did. He got me to do dream journals, write down all of my dreams, to do a lot of introspection and what we would call these days mindfulness, just to help me navigate what I was going through, to hold space for it without completely flipping out. But it took a long time. And I wasn't interested in socializing. And it was really a very, very difficult, strange time in my life. And sometimes I got deeply depressed. Oh my gosh, is this ever going to pass? It's like a dark cloud that's just come over me, and I can't get out from underneath it. I don't think I've ever felt suicidal, but what's the point? What am I doing here? Life made no sense to me. Nothing was calling to me. I wasn't excited about anything. And I didn't know what was wrong with me. Anyway, one day I was journaling and introspective, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this incredible light appeared in my inner vision. And it appeared to me like, if you had a lit candle, not the candle itself, but the flame of a candle. It appeared as a candle light. And I somehow, was transmitted to me that this light exists about here inside of me. And the first thing that came to mind at the time was I thought, oh, it reminded me of a pilot light. And whatever this energy was saying, yes, but it's indistinguishable. You cannot blow this light out. This is who you are. And I got to feel that essence as myself and how eternal and strong it is. That makes sense?
Absolutely.
And that was an incredible experience. And I can remember coming out of all of that and thinking, wow, I feel like this feeling that came with the transmission of the vision of this light was going to help carry me through whatever I needed to get through for the rest of my life. It was like an introduction to my eternal self. That's what it felt like. It's like in that time, I got introduced to a part of myself that was far greater, larger, whether you want to call it immortal, but yeah, I suppose immortal, a divine aspect of myself, much larger that I was contained within. I had this feeling like it had me and it will always have me. And from this place, I can move forward and face whatever comes. And the dark night of the soul it was like it just started to dissipate. Might sound totally bizarre, but it was a really powerful experience.
Totally not bizarre. Let me tell you, that's not bizarre. So what happened when you got a little older? Did you lose those abilities that you had, and why? Or did you hold on to them?
I went to uni for a short period of time studying psychology because I really wanted to understand what makes me tick, what makes humans tick. And I quickly became very disillusioned because what was on offer in psychology back in those days just was not beginning to touch the questions that I was seeking to find answers to. And so I got disillusioned and I dropped out and just started working. And I got so involved, I think, in my 20s of working and questing and just living and learning to know who I was beyond being someone's daughter, someone's friend, someone's student, parishioner. I just needed to find out who I was to me. And everything just kind of went by the wayside as I explored that throughout my 20s. But I will say this, in 1987, I believe that was the year of what was referred to as the harmonic convergence. Everything changed. I started experiencing huge activations. I don't know for sure whether you'd call it Kundalini, but I had been reading a book that my mother had recommended, the channeled book. And I'd been reading that and contemplating that just before bedtime. And they had suggested that as a way to further explore yourself, just in a quiet, calm, introspective moment, ask to feel the love. And so I put the book down on my chest. And that's exactly what I did. What happened is all of a sudden, I had this energy which I perceived. It came in, it felt like it came below and in front of me, and it came into my solar plexus and came up through my chest, out through the top of my head. But at the same time, as it hit my heart, it also went out through my arms. And this energy I'd give it the strength of a fire hose on full. It was alarming. It was frightening. It was so powerful. And the sound that went with it was really loud. And it developed over time into what felt like a centrifugal force in my head. I just heard this. And what I was feeling was when this energy hit my heart and went into my hands, just talking about it now, my hands are just tingling like mad. But what I felt like there was some sort of a huge, tremendous power surging through my heart, down my arms and into my hands. And it was just, like I said, there was a sound to it and there was a feeling to it. It's here right now with me. I didn't know what to make of it. It was utterly overwhelming. And I went to sleep in that state of, this is so loud, this is so overwhelming, I don't know what to do with it, I don't understand what's happening. And I went to sleep. And when I woke up the next morning, it was still happening. And I got up and I felt like I was in someone else's body. This energy, especially from the heart through the hand and the sound of it, was you couldn't just ignore it. It was really, really powerful. And I don't know over the weeks whether it diminished or whether I just assimilated that energy and it became normal. I suspect intuitively what I'm getting is I integrated it and it became normal rather than it dissipating. But interestingly, from that time, I got a lot more strong psychic activation, visions, lucid dreams. And I realized in the fullness of time that it was probably preparing me for what was to come after I'd become a mother. I feel like these activation experiences that I was having, that's how I think of them now, and with the benefit of hindsight, was an activation experience. I've had many, many activating experiences where something new would come online that later would be assimilated, incorporated, and would teach me how to navigate and do healing work in the world. And that was the first big one in 1987. And they continued through 88, 89, 1991, up to 93, almost constant activations of this sort of thing with incredible dreams and visions. I was the mother of 2 young children. And I felt like what was happening to me was taking me further away rather than bringing me closer in. I felt like I'd come to the point where I wanted to go on a holiday from all of this activation. I wanted time to deeply integrate what had been happening to me. I was feeling ungrounded. I was feeling unsafe even in my own body, not knowing what was coming next. I woke up one night in a lot of discomfort in the base of my spine. And again, I had this typical sound happening in my head, just that whoa, whoa. And uh, as I was waking up, the energy that was at the base of my spine started again, like a fire hose, was just coming straight up out to the top of my head. And it was really overwhelming. The sound of it and the enormity of it was just like, oh my God. And I was really freaking out. I thought, my God, I felt like I was a human rocket about to leave Earth's orbit. And then in my panic, I looked over and I thought, all of this noise, certainly it's going to wake my husband. It didn't. He didn't hear a thing. It wasn't bothering him in the least. He was just snoring away. But in my panic, I sat up, noticed he was still asleep, and put my feet on the floor. So I just get up and move. And when my feet hit the floor, if I felt like a rocket before, I absolutely was launched then. It was just the grounding energy going through my body after that was just more than I have words to describe. It was incredible. And I'm walking around the house in this state. My fear was I was going to leave this place and I'd be abandoning my babies. And that just made me put a complete halt on everything. And I was very blessed. I had dear friends in a spiritual meditation group that I participated in at the time in the Valley in Brisbane. And they had a teacher in northern New South Wales that they'd studied with for years who had full Kundalini awakenings. And when they told her what was happening to me, she said, bring her to me. So they did. And I spent a day with this woman and she counseled me. And she explained to me that when the Kundalini moves like this, spontaneously on its own, it has a purpose, never to invoke it. And don't fear it. She said, if it gets to be too much, it will back off. It will abate if you tell it to. And I did. I just thought, this is more than I can handle right now. And instead, I started more studying to have more of an intellectual understanding of this process that I was experiencing. I would have these crazy far out experiences. And then down the track, I might come on something that would begin to explain or at least slightly touch on, what I've experienced. That's always been the way with me. I had many years where I just had to have some time out. And then slowly I started bringing it back again. As my kids got older, I felt more confident. I felt like I was ready to explore again. I feel in the last 2 or 3 years, I'm in a new, fresh phase, completely different of activation than I've experienced previously, which I'm still very much exploring and learning. But it feels deeper. It feels more grounded than anything I've ever had before. And it feels really, really good. It's not threatening. It's not scary. It's exciting.
Teresa, I'm really interested. What advice would you give to parents who may have had a child like you who has similar kind of gifts and they don't know how to deal with it? What do you suggest to them?
Well, that's easy because I had a child like me. My firstborn was very much like me, extremely creative, extremely connected. Her inner world came completely downloaded. She would draw pictures and tell stories. And I just would encourage parents that have got children that have come with these memories and with these abilities to be open, be curious, ask the children to talk about it, ask them, encourage them to draw pictures, to talk about what they're experiencing and seeing. Make it normal. Don't make a big deal out of it. If they have difficulties with their friends or at school, you can say, well, not everyone can see what you can see. It's a real blessing. It's a real gift. And it's okay that you're having it, and it's okay that they're not having it at this time. Maybe there will come a time when they will. It's okay. It's not your problem. But to normalize the child, where they're at, what they're experiencing, and to not overly encourage it, but not to poo-poo it or to make it not okay or too woo-woo or threatening. Try and normalize it. Try and be curious about it. Try and give the child outlets to express what they're seeing. At least to yourself. Just listen. Hold space for it. And
Don't make it
if children learn to value it within themselves, that is the biggest gift going forward, is the affirmation that what I'm experiencing is real. It's okay. And it's here to help me. And I think if we're open to it as parents, we will naturally learn to navigate with discernment. You can help the child with discernment, when people are open and when they're not open, and to respect that, but not ever feel ashamed or embarrassed.
Do you have any suggestions around any practices or exercises that they could do? Besides, mindfulness, meditation.
I think more than anything, going into our own heart space and extending that invitation like a hand, a welcoming hand to that part of ourselves that we know somehow we've abandoned it, we've left it behind, when we're not quite clear when or where, but we know. I would say just go into the heart space and welcome that part back. Sometimes it helps to envision it as a child, bring it into your lap, and encourage it to speak and communicate and see what comes forward. It's not something you can make happen. It's certainly something I've never made happen, but we can, as I was saying before, it's so important to have an open mind and to be curious to see what wants to come out and make itself known to me. I mean, I'm discovering new parts of myself all the time. And it's through curiosity. And it's like, think of it as finding a little string, and you can't quite see where the string's bleeding off to, but you just keep gently pulling at it and see what comes out, see what arrives, see what stuff in your life. That's what I would recommend.
It's that innocence, isn't it?
It is.
And we
very
need
much.
to reclaim that, especially now. It's been an
Pleasure.
incredible journey for you. And it's inspiring to know that the abilities can still be rediscovered and integrated into our lives no matter what age.
Absolutely.
And for anyone out there, if you have a story of your own, feel free to reach out. Everyone's story is important, right? It's a story that may just be someone else's story.